3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, and...
Welcome back to the Great American Movie Review, where we review great American movies.
My name is Mikiah.
And I'm Kyle. This is a Movie of the Week style podcast where we take turns picking films and we talk about their context and quality. This week I've selected the 1987 box office disaster, Ishtar. Ishtar follows two Simon and Garfunkel-like songwriters as they become pawns in an international power struggle happening, I think it's in a fictional country in Ishtar, kind of on the border of Morocco.
Yeah, Simon and Garfunkel, if they were really bad and were not successful in any way.
Yes, yeah. The famously maligned film, starring Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty, has been ridiculed since its release in 1987, and it was a financial disaster, probably one of the worst all time if you take into account both inflation and also the time period, because I can point to like movies like John Carter or some of the most recent big budget movies that, because of how inflation has gone and how much money that they pour into not only the budget of the movie but also marketing, there have been plenty of box office bombs over the past 2 decades. But, the movie made
for the size of this movie that it was at the time, adjusted for inflation, it would have cost about $150 million to make in modern day, $55 million at the time. And then it only made $14 million, which comparatively would be a $150 million film only making $37 million total at the box office, which is crazy.
That is very, very bad.
That's a massive bomb. If it was the reverse, like if it was the budget of 14 million and made 55 million, that's a big hit in the time when it came out.
Absolutely. In the late 80s, yeah. But the director and writer Elaine May, who was known for acclaimed films such as Mikey and Nicky, which I have heard of. I actually heard of Mikey and Nicky before Ishtar, so I do know.
Back in the 70s, though.
She had not directed anything after this. She was in talks to do a film, I know, as late as a couple of years ago, but I think that didn't pan out. I know she did a couple of like TV show episodes or something like that, but that's the only thing that she's credited for after this movie.
Yeah, she did write The Birdcage after this and got nominated for an Oscar for writing that, because Michael Nichols is a good friend of hers.
Right.
But yeah, she made like The Heartbreak Kid, which got a remake with Ben Stiller in the 2000s, and stuff like that. She's made a few like very successful and well-regarded comedies back in the 70s, but yeah, this was not that.
No. So I had seen this movie a couple of years ago. I don't remember exactly when, but I remember like getting like interested in the so bad that they're good kind of movies, like The Room or Troll 2 are two that we bring up quite often, but there are others. Labyrinth with David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly, I would consider to be so bad it's good.
I wouldn't consider that to be one of those.
I think David Bowie carries it, but I absolutely do not think that it has aged quite well.
Oh, I mean, I just watched that like a couple months ago, and I agree completely. But I also I don't think that this belongs in that category.
I don't think it belongs. That's how I. So looking up so bad they're good movies is how I discovered this, but I still consider this to be a train wreck of a movie. It's kind of all over the place.
People really hate this movie.
Some people really love this movie though.
And you know what? I'm gonna piss you off right now because I don't think this movie's that bad. I don't love it. I don't think it's bad though.
I don't think it's the worst movie ever made. I don't think it's near that, but I get the hate for it. I don't get the like meta one of the worst movies ever made kind of thing, but yeah, this is a train wreck of a movie.
This thing's a mess. You feel its messy nature. But there's some dynamic elements, and I think that Hoffman and Beatty do a good enough job with their chemistry on screen, carrying what they're doing. I think the songs that they're doing and the whole bit around that is kind of fun, and also I laughed a decent amount. Like I had a good number of chuckles. As a comedy, this kind of worked for me. Overall, as a film, I think it really misses the mark in so many different ways. But as a comedy, I found myself laughing, which at the end of the day, that's all I really need it to do.
I think that's fair. What I would say for that is a lot of people think that this movie, if it had been done by Steve Martin and Martin Short as the two main characters, that it would have been regarded as a much better movie. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think
Uh,
Steve Martin and Martin Short have comedy nailed down. Like that kind of slapstick and
right.
silly kind of comedy. This is not that. This is trying to be that. But in my eyes, if they had gone more over the top, I would say would make this more funny. It's
Yeah, I think Steve
it's
Martin and Martin Short are comedians though, whereas Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman are like serious actors, I say in like air quotes.
well, Dustin Hoffman
But
did Tootsie a couple years
right,
back,
right. They've
so
done comedies, but it's still like Tootsie is still a highly acclaimed film. So it's
well,
not like
comedies can be highly acclaimed. So
right. I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying like the approach, they have different egos that they're trying to feed. Like even the studio promoting this movie was apparently just to satiate the egos of Beatty and Hoffman, who took out a lot of time obviously
and
to
the
make
rumor
it.
from Elaine May is that the studio, which I can't remember the exact name of the studio right now, but the studio sabotaged their own movie by like releasing how poorly the production went and then letting the press kind of knock it down, which
Right.
I think is probably the main reason why not a lot of people went to go see this movie was because the press it was very
Gouged
mixed
it.
at the
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the all of the production stuff and the bad press around it really kind of killed whatever this movie could have been.
Right.
Like I said, watching it, it's definitely a mess. Like that production, like you just tell me, oh, it was a rough production. I'd be like, yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
This movie feels like it's a bunch of scenes to some extent, especially after they get to Morocco.
Yeah,
Because
after they get to North Africa, they completely forget that they're songwriters. They it
for a bit, yeah.
for a solid amount of the movie, for about 40 minutes of the movie, like the first 30 minutes is the setup to it. And by the way, like you were talking about the chemistry, I don't feel it. I didn't feel it after the first 30 minutes, and I definitely didn't feel it
After the
for the
first
rest of
30
the movie.
minutes, not as much, no.
I,
I feel like the first 30 minutes are actually pretty decent. I like what it was setting up. I think the whole thing where they're like splitting up and then it flashes back to them becoming like getting together, but then like him on the roof and everything gonna jump, like all of that stuff, and then going back to them in the same bar because it's the only bar that's open. I don't know, that kind of stuff was working for me, but the general plot of this movie is where this falls apart because it's literally these two horrible musicians that are delusional about their own talent, then not having any really offers or leads. Their agent is like, hey, you can go to Morocco and make some money, not much but some. And so they just decide, well, we want to keep doing this, so may as well go to Morocco. So they go to Morocco, and then the second they get there, they're suddenly mixed up in this whole political power play.
yeah,
And it's just nonsense, which it's kind of like, a Man Who Knew Too Little situation, the Bill Murray movie kind of riffing on Men Who Knew Too Much, where it's like these two oblivious people are just kind of in the middle of something way bigger than them that they're not aware of. But it doesn't quite play like one of those types of movies does. That has an inherent comedic quality to it. But I don't think this movie just kind of, once they get to Morocco, it really feels like they just had a bunch of footage and they're just trying to find whatever they can string to make it work.
supposedly the I don't know the exact term that they call it, but the ratio to the film that the amount of film that they had after the production and the amount of film that they edited down to was
Mm.
something like 61 to 1, which is Apocalypse Now level numbers.
Yeah, I believe it. I 100% believe it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I believe that.
I think the editor found this pile of garbage and then was like, "How do I polish this?
Yeah,
What do I do with all of this?"
yeah. a lot of this movie just feels really awkward, like when it's trying to like do
Yeah.
certain things.
Which comedy can
Um,
be that way, that kind of cringy comedy that The Office kind of nailed down to a beat.
yeah,
But
and
and
there are
sometimes it
parts that
doesn't work for
work,
people. But what I would say is because it didn't go for like Monty Python or Steve Martin level absurdity,
right?
I think most of it falls flat. It got one chuckle out of me.
Yeah,
I it got one chuckle out of me, and I'll tell you exactly what it is. Spoilers for people who want to watch this movie, but nobody probably wants to watch this movie.
no,
Um,
not Ishtar.
the the like weapon auction that Dustin Hoffman makes up a language for.
Yes, I
He
was gonna bring that up.
he gets them riled up, and he says, Kareem Abdul, and then I think Warren Beatty's character goes Abdul Jabbar, and then so he hands them like the cash and everything like that. So that's the funniest thing that that got a laugh out
That
of me.
scene, yeah, that scene does crack me up a bit. That's
That's
where
the
it's
most
like they took
absurd part, and
right.
that's my favorite scene because it goes all out, which a comedy is
The
supposed to.
the other parts that really cracked me up in the movie was when they did incorporate the songwriting aspect of it. Like there's the point where they're crawling through the desert
Yeah.
dying and they start singing like a terrible song together. And it's so stupid,
And you're
but
like, man, it's
it's
some of our
funny.
best stuff. And they're just
Right,
like
right.
dying.
Like he's like gonna kill himself on the roof and he starts singing before he goes outside. Like he starts making up a song about it. It's just the dumbest worst song, but it's still like it's there's something to it, which Paul Williams wrote the music for it, like the lyrics and everything, along with Elaine
There
May.
was a writer for the music. I'm pretty
Well,
sure they
but
could
you
have
know
just
who
said anything.
but you know who Paul Williams is?
I sure don't.
He's a very famous songwriter. I'll just here. There's a couple of he wrote songs like "We've Only Just Begun," the song by the Carpenters,
Yeah.
and so he's written a lot of big hit songs. He's a very famous songwriter. So he helped with the music
Hmm.
in the writing of just like the literal little songs that they have, which none of them are good. I also did like the conclusion, um, where they're so dense that by the time that they realize that they have the upper hand at the end of the movie and can ask for anything they want, and the only thing they ask for is for them to produce the U.S. government to produce an album and distribute it and promote it. Their terrible music. I think
It's
that's a really funny way to go about like
yeah.
that ending just of these oafish characters. There are funny ideas here, and there's like you said you chuckled once. I got probably a good 6 or 7 like actual laughs out of this. But a lot of it I was sitting there going like I don't know. I also thought the blind camel was pretty funny. Charles Grodin is great,
He was
as
great as the
always.
CIA guy. He was my
Yeah,
favorite
he's
actor in
always
this
great
one.
though. Right, for sure. Easily. I think he's easily he felt like the only person who was really cast correctly.
Not only that,
Because I
but
think that
when you have Warren Beatty, who is the most oafish character, but you have Dustin Hoffman, who kind of rides the line where he kind of knows what he's doing, but also then he
right,
falls flat on his face many times, metaphorically, and then you have um, Jim Harrison, the CIA guy, who is coming in. He's no nonsense, no bullshit kind of thing, like that works, but only when you have oafish characters.
right.
For me,
There's
it's kind of
the
like a Dumb
weird
and Dumber
thing.
kind of thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a big Dumb and Dumber quality to it's that kind of comedy, or at least those comedy. It's a broad comedy, is what this is. Unfortunately, I feel like it falls into that kind of awkwardness too much. Whereas a broad comedy should, when it is awkward, it should be making you laugh still,
Yeah.
But this movie just doesn't quite have that. It doesn't have a consistency there. So while the comedy, I say, like the actual comedic elements worked for me, like I think that everything in the movie seemed to be working against a good comedic concept,
Yeah.
including like the casting. Like I think Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman, they're great actors. I did get a little bit more of their chemistry than I think you did. However, I still feel like they were like completely miscast for this.
I got their chemistry as great actors because it's difficult for great actors to lose all chemistry even when they
Right.
genre, jump, but I do think that plenty of pairings, especially in the 80s, would have been better. suited for
Oh,
this.
absolutely. This doesn't even really feel much like an 80s movie, you know, outside of like some of the scoring elements and whatnot and some of the broadness of it all. But particularly the first 30 minutes where they're still in New York feels very much like a 70s comedy more so, which makes sense
That's
from
probably,
Elaine May,
yeah,
who, yeah,
because Elaine May, Warren Beatty, and Dustin Hoffman are all children of the, or like they broke out in the
yeah,
70s, so it makes
they're all
sense.
70s people.
Yep.
So, yeah, but apparently what I didn't read up a ton on it, but apparently I heard a lot in what I did see about Elaine May and Warren Beatty really butting heads because Warren Beatty also produced this and he's kind of putting her as the director, pushed for her for that role
Hmm.
as kind of a favor because she wrote the movie Heaven Can Wait, which is a pretty good movie from the 70s with Warren Beatty, but it was a big hit for him.
Right.
So um, and Dustin Hoffman, she also wrote a movie. I forgot. She wrote something that he was into. So they were like, yeah, let's just like throw her a bone. It seems to be the attitude behind that. But then once they got on set, there was apparently like big clashing
Well, she
between
co-wrote Tootsie,
Beatty and
so.
yeah, that's the one. She co-wrote Tootsie. So
Oh, she co-wrote Labyrinth
she's
as well. I'm getting
really
a yes, she did.
wow. You didn't even know that.
Suddenly things are falling in line. Oh, she acted in The Graduate.
She's an actor in a lot of things.
Yeah.
She's also appeared in a lot of films, more films than she directed, obviously, and even wrote. So, but yeah, just I feel like that because they would apparently go back and forth, and you know, they wanted to fire her, but Beatty was like, if she's gone, then I'm gone at this point because it's not worth continuing. But they'd already sunk a bunch of money into it, so it wasn't worth losing your producer slash star and director all at once. It would have just killed the whole production.
Yeah. And that's 50 million down the hole, not including marketing, so yeah.
Yeah, they just forced themselves to finish this movie, is what it seems like. So, like, and once again, I understand why this thing is like for the time that it came out. Like, apparently, like Beverly Hills Cop 2 is a movie that came out a week later and dethroned it at the box office because it did open to number one and then dropped
Well, I don't think it
steeply
opened
after that.
against anything that was going to
Right.
go to
But
number
then,
one.
but like comedies at the time were things like Beverly Hills Cop, you know.
Yeah.
80s comedies were like Ghostbusters and you know they were a different thing than they were in the 70s.
Right.
And so this having a little bit more of that 70s flavor to it, but then also not
And less of
succeeding
the
very well at it.
absurdity, kind of, so.
Yeah, less of the absurdity, less of yeah, it just doesn't land really, unfortunately. It made me kind of sad watching it because I was like, people hate this movie, I think, more than they should, but it's also not very good. Like
Well,
I can't like,
you know Gary Larson, Tales from the Far Side comic strip writer?
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
There's a Far Side comic with it,
there's
yeah.
a Far Side comic where it's Hell's Video Store and it's just copies of Ishtar, and he released a statement that is typically when you see that comic, it's going to be right underneath. So he says, quote, "To whom it may concern, when I drew the above cartoon, I had not actually seen Ishtar. I only knew or sensed that it had entered the film industry lexicon as a major turkey. Years later, I saw it on an airplane and was stunned at what was happening to me. I was being entertained. Sure, maybe it's not the greatest film ever made, but my cartoon was way off the mark. There are so many cartoons for which I should probably write an apology, but this is the only one that compels me to do so."
Right. Yeah, and I feel like that's the kind of thing it is. I don't think the hate that it got is or is deserved for what this movie ultimately is.
Yeah.
Um, and all the press and everything lampooning it, and it's still it's still pretty well hated by the general public. Not many people have seen it. Obviously, it bombed and then got swept away as a joke. Um,
I think
but
even at the
yeah,
time, it's difficult to say, but I do know that it did have, like I said, very middling critical reviews. So I think, or I suspect, because it's the 80s and because like that's how you're gonna find out. You're gonna find out from like Roger Ebert or Time Magazine or the Los Angeles or the LA Times, or you're gonna find out from the people who write columns based on those movies whether or not you're gonna go see those movies. especially back in
Yeah.
those days. Now
Oh,
you're going
right,
to
right.
look to a YouTube review, or you're going to look to a Reddit review, which is more populist, I would say. So you're and less journalist. So you're definitely going to
Yeah.
look to different people for different eras. So I think we can blame a few things: the terrible production, the studio sabotaging it. Probably was what happened. It was Columbia Productions, which I believe is a subsidiary of Sony. I don't know if they were at the time, but
Nowadays,
nowadays
nowadays
it
they
is.
are. Yeah.
Um, I don't think they were at the time in the 80s, but they might have been. So production, studio, and then the press. So basically everyone on basically everyone is everyone. Yeah, everyone not named the general public can be
Yeah.
blamed for this.
Yeah. Yeah, and the movie didn't really help itself with that either, because like I said, I did find a lot of, honestly, quite a few things to laugh at in it.
This has very little rewatchability, though.
Honestly, I actually think that if I watched it again, I would find the things that I like about it, I like even more, you know? And that the things I didn't like about it probably don't bother me as much if I were to watch it again. I don't really see myself going back to it, but I think that this would get better on a repeat viewing, understanding more what it is.
I think it got
But
worse for
there,
me, but only because I was disappointed again. So it was
right.
like or I knew how disappointed I would be, and yet somehow I was still disappointed.
Yeah, I guess if you're like finding, you know, bad things to like, if you didn't really enjoy it at all, if you found no real enjoyment in it, I wouldn't watch it again. Just don't like, you're not gonna like it anymore the next time. But if you found some stuff that you did like in here, like if you like, I'm on the edge of saying that I like this movie. I still don't think that I quite do, but if I rewatched it again, maybe I would. Just because I was watching it with like this kind of baffled like curiosity to some extent of like,
Yeah.
how did this happen? How did this come about? But there's also plenty of jokes in here that just completely don't work. For instance, so when they get to um, Morocco originally in the airport, or they get to the airport and then Dustin Hoffman says he loses his passport because the girl is trying to like
Isabel
get him
Adjani.
to,
Her name is
yeah,
Shira.
played by Isabel Adjani. Yeah. Which, okay, her casting, she's a fine actor. She is a French actress with bright blue eyes. She is in no way Middle Eastern at all.
She's quite dull in
But
this movie. Well, she is. I believe her heritage is somewhere somewhere North African, but yeah,
is
no.
it? Well, she doesn't. She looks
I mean, her
very
father's
white
name is literally
French
Mohammed
woman.
Adjani, so
Okay, well maybe then, but I don't know. She just doesn't. She
doubtful that
doesn't.
he's from Norway.
Yeah. But yeah, she just looks out of place and she feels out of place in her performance. I mean, yeah, she's clearly, once again, just like the casting just feels off in this
Yep.
movie. Like everybody feels miscast except for Charles Grodin. But
Well,
and it's just weird though too, because both of them, so it's joke happens twice in the movie where she comes up and she's dressed a certain way to look like a boy. That's
right.
intentional, but she in no way looks like a boy.
Or
And
sounds like
she
a
goes
boy.
through, or sounds like a boy. She goes through this whole conversation with Dustin Hoffman at the airport where he thinks she's a girl, and then she like flashes him to show that she's a girl, and then
He
I
says
did like
he says,
Hoffman
quote, "Look what you
look
have."
at what you have.
Yeah.
I thought his delivery on that line was actually pretty
The delivery
funny.
was good, but man, what why would you write that down?
I don't know. He's like, "But look what you have."
That's
I
the
really
absurdity.
did like
That's
his
the
delivery.
absurdity I want to see. That's
Right. So like the whole situation of him not believing that she's a woman and then like having to do that was not funny, but his line delivery there was funny. There's stuff to glean out of even the unfunny moments.
right.
But that happens again later when she's talking to
Well, she
Warren
breaks
Beatty's
into
character.
their
Yeah.
apartment.
And it gets to the point where he's like groping her and he's like, "Are those breasts?" Warren Beatty is not as good in this movie as Dustin Hoffman. I would say. I think Dustin Hoffman has more deliveries that work for me.
He goes for like a Jeff Daniels and like Dumb and Dumber. Of course, that movie
Right.
came out after, but like the comparison is there. It's like the duller
Right.
character who is more aloft, yeah,
Aloof.
aloof, yeah. Aloft. He's higher up.
Aloft.
He is taller than Dustin Hoffman.
He is
so,
taller.
Yeah,
There's
he's
a
more aloof
distinct
and
height
aloft.
difference. But yeah, and it's really the whole, like, they're trying to be pit against each other because there's this one guy that the US is, it's all confusing to me. I honestly, it's been a few days and I can't remember a lot of the details of the
No,
plot.
yeah. So the U.S. is on Ishtar's side, and like
Yeah.
a back and forth between Ishtar and Libya, and it's like it's
So she represents this resistance group,
yes,
and
and
yeah,
I guess she would be. Well, it's stated that she's a communist, so I guess she's just against the royalty of Ishtar, I guess.
yeah. And there's this whole thing with a map and these two prophets that are supposed to come as well, and they're all after this map, kind of.
And so everyone somehow thinks that Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman are the messengers from God.
Kind of a Three Amigos almost situation. Once
Yeah.
again, that kind of, it just doesn't work as well as Three Amigos because Three Amigos is completely absurd the whole time.
Oh man, Chevy Chase and Steve Martin would have made a great couple in this.
Absolutely,
At the
that would have been
time.
a great, yeah, at the time, just especially with the musical aspect of it,
Oh yeah.
you reteam some of the Three Amigos thing. I mean, I don't know if Three Amigos came up before or after this, honestly, but
It might have come out around the same time. 86, literally a year before.
the year before, yeah. But yeah, it's just it's just a huge misfire, and there's such, like, once again, the plotting is just so weird because like we said, there's all of this weird political stuff happening, and then they're just caught in the middle, and they're kind of pit against each other, like, oh, he's a spy for the US, oh, he's a spy for the rebels, and then
Yeah.
the other way around, and they're trying to not reveal each other because they distrust each other
Yeah.
now, but they're all after, all of these different organizations and countries and whatever are after them. So they're like running through markets being chased by people with guns. That whole middle section of the movie where they're just kind of running around and like not trusting each other was just kind of like, none of this was working at all. And you kind of lost the lead here on either one of your plot lines of, like, either the not being aware, being like completely oblivious to what they're involved in kind of idea of like comedy versus the whole Three Amigos false heroes style comedy.
Yeah.
Like, it's just kind of, it could have just picked Elaine, and it doesn't, and it just doesn't work. Which is kind of this whole movie's problem, as we kind of said. This movie feels like a ton of different things.
It could have gone the way of like Airplane or Top Secret. You've seen Top Secret, the Val Kilmer film.
Oh my gosh, I love
Top Secret.
I've been
it's so
thinking
good.
about picking Top Secret like every week because
Oh, yeah.
of how much I love
But-
it. It'll come
But
around.
the closest it gets, the two CIA agents who are dressed in Arab garb. One says to
Yeah.
the other, "The KGB are here. I recognize two agents. The ones dressed as Texans? No. The ones dressed as Texans are Arabs. The ones dressed as Texans are Arab agents. I also recognize two guys from the Turkish intelligence. Which ones? The ones in Hawaiian shirts? No, the Bermuda shorts. The ones in Hawaiian shirts are tourists." And
Right. That's a funny interaction.
That is a funny interaction right there.
It just feels out of place in
Absolutely.
the movie because that's the problem. Like, all like the actual funny things
Yeah.
feel kind of out of place.
What shouldn't
Like,
in
I'm
a
like,
comedy.
they lucked into it.
It
which
shouldn't
I think it's because you right. I think you just have a bunch of talented people, including from the writing and directing side of things. But it was just a mismatch of stars and, production team, and everything just didn't align right.
Right.
So that mismatch just created this very awkward film that has really great moments in it.
Mhm.
But ultimately, those great moments just feel like a little oasis in the desert of this weird production.
Yeah, when comedy feels out of place in a comedy movie, that's when you
Yeah.
know you did it wrong.
Yeah, because it doesn't work in the other way. Like, if it's one of those movies where it's like, oh, it's not fully a comedy, it has comedic elements. It's like, no. This whole premise is an absurdist kind of comedy, and it just doesn't deliver on that.
No.
But yeah. Do you have any other thoughts
this gonna
about
be another
Ishtar
quick one?
overall? This is probably going to be another quick one, honestly.
Yeah.
But unless you have any more specific thoughts about it.
Not really. Just my. No, not really.
Yeah, I did. Once again, 'cause there's stuff I like about this movie. I would almost go so far as to say
The
I
ideas
almost
are there
do
for
like
me,
it,
but the
but
execution
uh,
is mostly
right.
where it
Because
falls.
I even like that after all of like the gun runners leave because they think that they're just sending him to the desert to die, which that was a whole confusing thing too.
Yep.
Because she gave him these beads, and I was like, why is she sending him to the desert to die? Like I didn't remember. I thought she was actually supposed to be helping them. I was just like, this is very confusing to me. Like I was having a hard time keeping. There's probably a reason that somebody could yell at me in the comments about, but if you want to, go for it.
Also, Warren Beatty doesn't know that wind exists in the desert when it's sand being blown constantly. They've been in the
The
desert for a couple of
level
days at least. They would have
the
noticed that
level of
it's wind.
stupidity, yeah, the level of stupidity is inconsistent. Like
Yeah.
sometimes they are way more oafish than they even appear to be at first.
Not only that, but
Um,
it's if if you're dumb, that's fair, but the dumbness kind of has to make sense in a way.
right,
You can't just it's got to be logically dumb, but like the opposite kind of thing. You can't just be irrational and expect the audience to kind of get along with that. I don't
right.
know. It just doesn't work for me in that way.
No, it really doesn't. But like I said, so I do like though that once again that whole thing where they're like auctioning off guns is honestly a kind of funny sequence. And then what that leads to is like when they all bail after the helicopter shows up because they think they're gonna find them just dead in the desert, but no, they're in the middle of this gun smuggling like auction. But then all of the auctioneers and everybody bails and they end up with like a rocket launcher and some machine
Yeah, she
guns.
shoots rocket launchers at helicopters sent to kill them.
Yeah, like that, like that's the kind of absurd thing that I wish this movie had more of, you
Yep.
know, stuff with the camel, like camel stepping on Charles Grodin's foot, you know, just like stuff like that, the blind camel. It's a
or
silly
or
idea
him
with,
like basically
yeah,
debriefing Dustin Hoffman, but they're playing it off as like a oh buy my camel kind of thing, and he's just like point at the camel, and Dustin Hoffman is just pointing at the camel for a solid like 2 minutes,
yeah,
just talking to him,
yeah.
and that
Like I
kind of
could
thing.
almost just based on like individual things in this movie, I could really almost talk myself into liking it. Although watching it through, it's not the same. Like I think
No,
that there, like I said, there's a lot of things that work in here for me. It just doesn't gel at
it's a
all.
bit like watching a TV show where the action sequences are so good, but like everything in between is just filler. You like hype yourself up for the action sequence, and even though like only 5 minutes of the 25 or 45-minute TV show episode is actually good, you're like, wow, that was a great episode, just because you're putting in the or you're emphasizing the 5 minutes that were good, but then you're forgetting the 40 minutes that
Yeah.
wasn't. So it's a bit like that to me.
All right. Well, you ready to move into scoring
I
then?
am absolutely ready to move into scoring. Scoring is always 0 to 2, 0 being poor, 1 being good, 2 being great. We keep it as vague as possible. That way we can start a conversation, don't really think what the film actually is this score.
All right. The first category, as usual, is writing. Um, yeah, that's a 0.
Yeah, I wouldn't even qualify this as good writing. So,
Yeah,
there
I feel like they had half a script, you know, and just kind of like just kept going with some. I don't even know. It doesn't. Nothing really gels quite the way it should. There's
it's absolutely a mess.
they throw too much at you for there to be as little to it as there
And
is,
they
you
also
know?
forget half the movie for half the movie.
Right. Yeah.
Or
Writing's a pretty easy 0.
yeah.
World building.
I would almost
World
I would
yeah.
almost say that this might be a 1 because I can tell where the budget went,
Yes.
and
The
I given the fact that they shot on location in Morocco, I believe this is in Morocco. It feels like that to me. It feels like Morocco.
I do think they do a good job of establishing like the idea of the concept here with these two terrible songwriters going somewhere else in the world to be able to try to sell themselves in a different way than they were able, because they were failing in the States.
What were their options?
Um,
Hungary and Morocco?
right, I think something
Yeah.
like that. But yeah, like I like the idea here, and I think, in terms of what they present, they make that work for that core idea. I think that where it loses me is in all of the minutia of the actual plot. It just doesn't make sense. But I think that's more in the writing. I think the world building is fine. I would give it a 1.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think a 1 because the film looks pretty good, especially for 1987. So,
Yeah.
or not like
Yeah.
not like part of visuals, but like all the sets look clean
Yeah.
at least.
Absolutely. All right, characters.
It's a 0 for me.
It's a
The
0 for
one
me
character
too.
I like is the CIA dude, and like he's he's used quite a bit, but it's not enough for me. Isabel Adjani's character is probably the worst in this movie. I don't understand. I've seen the movie twice. I still don't know what her plans are for this. I don't really know what she's going for in this movie. The Do you remember the professor guy, the British professor who is like the he's like the guy helping the dig to find the map or whatever? Like
Oh yeah.
he's just in like 1.5 scenes, and he's like captured by the communists or something like that.
Right. I don't know
And
what happened to him.
I don't know what he was there for.
Yeah, and then the brother character, that's another thing. Like she doesn't look anything like him. They
Wasn't
have
she
no
killed?
family
Wasn't he killed by
resemblance.
communists? So was he killed by
I,
the group of her sister?
I don't I don't know. I don't know.
I don't
I
know.
don't know, and I don't care enough to know.
Oh, absolutely not. I'm asking these questions as kind of like a rhetorical. I don't think there's an answer for these questions, quite frankly.
Yeah, no, the characters are bad. It just is. The
Yeah.
characters are bad. Okay, our next category is directing.
I have no
Um,
doubt that this is probably Elaine May's worst directed movie. I'll
yeah,
just say
this is a
that. I
0.
haven't seen the other
I
ones,
think
but I can't imagine this is up there.
this made me want to go back and watch her others.
Yeah,
Though. Like
because
I
they can't be
still,
like this.
yeah, and they're well regarded.
Right.
And I feel like there's talent here in what she's able to bring in those moments that really do work. But it just overall, I think the production got away from her.
Absolutely.
So part of being a director is making sure that that's not happening. And being kind of the leader on set. Maybe it's not her fault that it got away from her, but it still got away from her.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's fair. It may not be her fault, but like if we're going to shoulder the blame on somebody, I guess we could shoulder it on the studio. We could shoulder it
yeah,
on the producer, but like director's got
I
to
don't
take some
think
blame for
she
this.
deserved to be put in. The term movie jail only
Oh,
came
yeah,
around
no.
after this movie. Like literally that term event was invented around this movie for her and what happened to her. I don't think she deserved that. I think that if she wanted to keep directing films, I don't think that this should have like killed her career
No.
in that capacity. I think that's unfair, unfortunately, especially if she had like a good track record beforehand and even afterwards.
Yeah.
Not directing, but writing. So, uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
she's
it's
written some pretty
unfortunate,
great
but
movies.
yeah.
How in the world?
I mean, once again, The Birdcage. She got nominated for an Oscar for that in '96, and that movie is great.
Yeah.
So I love The Birdcage. Yeah. All right, acting. Acting, I feel
I don't
kind of
think
torn on.
I think I can't give this a 1 because of the great actors in it. I mean,
I think,
just
yeah,
as well, I'm very disappointed by the acting still. Even if I take into account it's a comedy.
yeah. Hoffman and Grodin do it for me in this movie. I think that Hoffman ends up delivering on a bad character better than that character could have been. But Beatty doesn't really work for me in this, and most of the other side characters don't work for me in this. And I can't just justify giving the whole movie like a positive grade here for acting just because two of the performers I think are doing a pretty good job.
But if Hoffman and Grodin were doing like fantastic jobs throughout, I would say probably a 1. Like if half the main
Yeah,
characters and a decent side character are doing a great job, then
Yeah.
that could probably be a 1. But if two characters are doing a fine job, or two actors are doing a fine job, and the rest are doing, I'm gonna say it, very, very poor jobs, then yeah, I
Yeah.
can't really give this a 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
Visuals is gonna be a little bit like world building to me. I
I think
think
it's a 1.
I think it's a 1. I think it's nothing
It's a
spectacular.
good-looking
It
movie.
is a good
It's a
looking
good-looking
movie.
movie, though. Like this movie visually, there's nothing I can qualm about there. I think that this is a good-looking movie. It's a
If you
two.
fill it with better
Um,
subjects, it's a much better movie.
right. It's in our next category of editing where it really falls apart. If you're
Oh
just
yeah.
like watching this in the background, you're not going to notice how messy it is.
Yeah.
But if you're paying attention to it, this is where the editing comes in. You are going to notice that it's just so all over the place.
It's
'Cause that's a
horrible.
clear 0.
Yeah.
That's its worst
The
quality is its editing.
also the pacing. Like just the
Yeah.
pacing in and of itself, it jumps around so much that I don't know what's going on.
That's part of the awkwardness of it all, too.
Yeah. And it's not in a
It's
funny
just
way. It's not like in a top
no.
secret where the entirety of the editing is specifically for the absurdism, but you can
Right.
follow along quite easily. It's like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. If you're
Right.
editing for that absurdism, it's actually very easy to edit, or
Right.
very easy on the editor's job, because it's mostly it'll mostly be a like visual kind of thing, and you
Well,
can
it's
absolutely
like how anything works. If you have great story structure, if you have great pre-visualizations and storyboarding and
Yep.
stuff like that done, if you were working in a visual medium, and if the people who are working on the visual aspects of those medium in the story planning and in the execution do a good job, then it'll be easier on the editors. But this production clearly was just so all over the place and there was so much footage. I'm impressed that they were able to make anything that flowed well with this movie.
Yeah.
Because this, like I said, this movie, it does have, like you can follow along with it. It's not complete gibberish and nonsense. It's just clumsy and awkward. So yeah, editing's a 0. Yeah, sound is our next category. I don't really remember the score. It's not remarkable in its sound at all. It's a comedy. They usually aren't the most remarkable things
Yeah.
in sound necessarily. I'd give it a 0 just because it doesn't do anything particularly good here with sound. Like visuals, I would say this movie looks good. Sound, I'm like, this movie sounds fine, but
Fine isn't good for this
Fine is
movie.
fine. Yeah.
I think that's fair. I think it's mostly because I can't remember it, but it's one of those things. It can be helpful or hurtful when you can't remember anything about the sound of the movie. So I think it's hurtful in this
Yeah.
case.
For me, so genre category is our next category. This is obviously a comedy. And like I said, for me, I would give this a 1 for comedy. Like, I feel pretty strongly. I'd give this a 1 because I think a lot of the comedy for me worked here. It's just everything around it didn't work at all.
Yeah.
So I would give the comedy a 1 here personally. That's like the one thing I really feel strongly about.
So I'll say this about comedy in general. So comedy, of course, subjective, but I feel like there are some things that you can look at, some certain things that make you laugh that you can reproduce. So certain comedians, if they stay in form and write kind of the same kind of jokes, you can keep
Yeah.
liking that comedian. So it's subjective, but it can be reproduced. And I think there's a mass audience kind of comedy that we keep saying absurdism, but I feel like when it comes to the things that make people laugh, or the things that make most people laugh, because some people are not going to find just anything funny, and some people are going to laugh at everything. But I feel like that kind of absurdism that the Looney Tunes did, that Steve Martin and Martin Short do, and Monty Python does, I feel like those are some of the most reproducible kind of comedy that just a lot more people enjoy than not. So
Right.
I feel like this is a type of comedy that not a lot of people are going to enjoy. Is my
And that's where it comes down to. Yeah, I guess it comes down to my own specific taste here, because this is coming down to our show and everything. What you and I think. And for me, I found myself laughing
But
quite a bit.
but the reason I bring
And
that up,
I can go.
the reason I bring that up is because even
Yeah,
if you don't like a certain Monty Python movie, I think we would have to still give it a 2. That kind of thing. But if you want to go based on subjective,
I see.
maybe.
Yeah,
But
comedy being objective is inherently a
I'm not
flawed
saying
way of looking
objective.
at
I'm
comedy
saying
because
more than subjective.
yeah,
It's
okay,
there's
yeah.
lesser subjective
I guess
in
what
that case, I guess.
yeah, I guess with this movie, I can look at every single category and I can be like, if this movie was zeros across the board, but I laughed as much
Hmm.
as I laughed during this movie, I would still give it a 1 for comedy, even if it was zeros in every other category. So that's just kind of where I'm at with comedy. I just enjoyed it comedically enough to give it that 1 here in this
Okay.
section.
I'm gonna agree with you on this. It only got 1 laugh out of me, but that's not really how I would describe comedy, I guess. Because if there's a movie that is a comedic movie that I've seen so many times that I have memorized all the jokes and can basically um, verbatim reproduce that with like in a comedian style without laughing even at my own interpretation of it, then yeah, I would still probably give that thing a 2.
Yeah, I think you can have a movie that's like a zeros across the board and still have comedy potentially coming at a
Yeah.
2. Like comedy is just such a weird thing.
Honestly,
But
The Room.
that's part of the
The
joy of
Room
it.
would be that for me. Zeros across the board.
Yeah.
Well, except for impact. It's got insane impact culturally nowadays, but zeros across
Right.
the board. But I think a comedy would be the way I describe that because I think Tommy Wiseau was going for comedic factor. It's just that everyone was laughing at him, not with him.
Our final category for is as always is impact.
I can't deny this is talked about, but not that much. But it's still talked about.
It is talked about. I'm hovering between a 1 and a 0 on impact here. It
I'm kind of hovering at that 1 because it definitely had an impact on
true.
everything. It had a gigantic impact on Elaine May's life. It
Yeah.
had
I'm with
it
you.
had enormous impact on the people working around it, and it also had an impact on the people who um, wrote the mixed reviews on it, and the people who saw it in theaters, and the people who despised it even
Yeah.
though they didn't see it.
Yeah, I'd
Kind of
never
thing.
seen it before this, but I'd heard of it. Like I was aware of it. I don't think the general public is at this point, but film fans at least know
Yeah.
about it because of its, you know, the way it's been dragged through the mud over the years. But
I would kind of describe you as a movie historian, and if you were a movie historian and didn't hear about this
yeah,
movie, I'd be shocked.
it holds a weird place, like a very weird place.
Yeah.
But I think it also represents just kind of an interesting shift in comedy tastes at the time too. So, yeah, impact. I'm fine giving that a 1, which puts us at a
Yep.
total for this one of 4 out of 20.
4 out of
Um,
20.
which is fair, and this is me.
A nice even 2 out of
I
10.
think that's fair. That's actually the same number I came down to on my final score, when I did this
Hmm.
solo. So even though, like I said, I almost would say I like this movie, so it's level of 4 out of 20. Yeah, it's not great, but I think that there is some appeal here, and I don't think it's as bad as its reputation, but it's also still not good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll agree with that sentiment. I don't think it's as bad as its reputation. I don't think it deserves all the hate. I think it deserves to be studied.
yeah,
It's one of
absolutely.
those it's one of those bring this up in like a film class because how did this go so
What
wrong?
That's honestly watch it and Apocalypse Now back to back and be like, okay,
Oh yeah.
these both had similar kind of like weird shooting production issues and stuff going on behind the scenes. However, one of them turned into an all-time classic and one of them turned into an all-time flop. So
I would say just as well. Apocalypse Now is like that also just has a this strange tangent that we're going on, audience, but
oh, we can go on a
Apocalypse
tangent.
Now
We're under on time, so
has 3 absolutely we are. It's not even an hour yet. Um Apocalypse Now has 3 uh editions basically. It's got the final cut, which is the one that came out it's got the director's cut and what I would call the final cut, the one that came out like 5 years ago, and it's got the theatrical cut. I've seen all
Well,
three.
there's
I would
Redux as
consider the
well.
theatrical cut to be the Redux is the
Yeah,
final is
Redux.
what I
Yeah,
consider the final cut,
yeah,
because it's probably the last one to come out,
right.
hopefully. um, the theatrical cut I think is around 2.5 hours. I'm ballparking this. 2.5 hours is
I've
the
only
theatrical
seen the
cut.
theatrical.
Thank God, because the other two are messes. The director's cut, which I want to say is kind of close to 4 hours, is a mess. It adds the plantation scene with the French living in the, I believe it's the
Mm,
Cambodian wilderness, and it's just a random like 25 minutes put into that movie for some reason. It's also got a lot
yeah.
more establishing shots and that kind of thing, which is kind of what the Redux kept. The Redux kept the plantation scene and it kept a lot of the panning shots, but I think it's around 3 hours to 3 hours and 30 minutes. I think it's
Okay.
something like that. But no, the theatrical cut by far is the best one. It's paced very well. It doesn't meander for an extra 45 or extra hour and a half where it doesn't need it. But it is also one of those things where the theatrical cut is a masterclass in editing given how many hours that they shot. So, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
say it.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I'm with you. Well, I'm not with you or not. Actually, I just said that out of habit. But because
No, you
I've only
understand what I'm
seen.
saying, but whether or
Yeah,
not
I
you agree with
understand
me,
what you say. I've only seen the original cut, so I can't speak to the other
the words that
versions of it.
exited your mouth and entered my ears, I picked them up. Yeah.
That's my processing disorder, where like you'll say something and I'll respond without it having registered to me yet, and
Hmm.
then I'll be like, wait a second. So I call it my brain delay. So for anybody listening, if that ever comes across that way, that's why. So, um, but yeah, that's kind of it for our conversation on Ishtar right now.
I believe so.
Um, yeah, that'll wrap up that conversation. But we do have a little announcement for next week's movie that we're going to be watching.
What are we watching next time?
I have selected our first ever anime film, and it's probably not one that you've seen, and it's you probably haven't even heard of it, honestly. But um, this movie is one of Satoshi Kon's movies. He directed things like Perfect Blue, Paprika, Millennium Actress. A very prolific anime filmmaker. This is none of those three films. Because we are now going to be in December, if you're a fan of his work, then you already know where I'm going. Um, but we'll be talking about his holiday themed film, Tokyo Godfathers. Have you heard of that?
I have not heard of that. This is all new to me.
I have not seen Tokyo Godfathers, so this will be new to me as well. Um,
Uh,
but this will be our first non-American film that I've seen in a long time. If you don't know, did you recognize any of those names of movies that I listed?
absolutely not. And also Tokyo Godfathers. I don't know if you know this. There's a I think it's a JRPG game that's coming out in the near future called Unicorn Overlord or Overload or
Oh,
something like that. And it's just take two random words that really shouldn't be together, but then yet they're there. That's what Tokyo Godfathers feels like to me.
I feel like it'll make more sense watching it, but I don't know what it's about at all. Like I just know it's from him, and I love a lot of his
Is
films.
it the Japanese
So like,
mafia? Is it Yakuza? Or
um, I don't know. Like I said, I have no idea.
huh.
I've not seen it. I've not even read a synopsis on it. So I picked it because I wanted to watch it, and I figured using the December holiday time was a good excuse to do so.
Yep.
But like Paprika is a very big influence on things like Inception. Um, his movies get kind of weird. I'm not gonna lie. They get kind of weird. They can get pretty dark too. I don't know what the case is for this movie. Like I said, I haven't seen it, but
I don't know.
I
I've seen
love.
some pretty weird animes.
Yeah, Millennium. His he also has a tendency to just make great dramas. As in the form of animation. Like Millennium Actress is like that, where it's just a woman reevaluating her life as an actress over the years. Being interviewed and flashing back to working on different sets as it's integrating with her life as her mind is kind of fading. It's a really fascinating movie. I love this man's work, so I'm really excited to watch something that I've not seen from him
I
yet.
wonder if they'll be eating KFC. Oh, for anybody who doesn't know, KFC is one of the biggest chains of fast food in Japan, and they annually, just like we eat like a Christmas dinner, they'll eat KFC on Christmas.
Interesting. I actually didn't know that.
Yep.
Wow, we'll keep these good facts coming. We'll have lots to talk
I
about
will
next
never
week.
stop. Couldn't even stop me
Uh,
if you tried.
All right, well, that'll do it for this week's under an hour conversation about Ishtar.
Let's
Enjoy.
go.
Yeah, honestly, enjoy the holiday season, everybody. We're trying to take it easy, so I might, I'm not guaranteeing that I'll have as many reviews as I've had out the last couple of weeks. Specifically, that 1 week where I did 3 was a lot, but
Oh yeah.
but yeah, just thanks for checking us out and listening to us ramble on about Ishtar and how not great it is. And yeah, we'll see you at the movies.